Hi and welcome to PolyOriginals with Fiona Abel-Smith. So today I thought we'd have another go at painting with polymer clay, and this time we're going to do a little Highland Loch scene, a nice little landscape, and we're particularly looking at the reflections here, which is what you'd get in a still lake. So I'm going to take you all the way through every aspect you need to end up with this, and I've done this one as a brooch, but you can make it into whatever you want. This technique is great for using up scrap clay. Just tiny little bits, that's all we're going to use. It's relatively simple once you see how I do this, and then once you've got the technique down you can just go and do whatever you want to do. So I'm not going to take you through the equipment for this one, we're going to launch straight into it, and I'll launch straight into it by showing you the small amounts of clay we're going to use to create this little Highland scene. For the clay we need for today, it's actually very small amounts, so I haven't done my normal and put it out into amounts. I've done it like this instead, so you can see how small the pieces are that we actually need to work with. For doing any painting with clay techniques, the softer the clay, the easier it is to do, but having said that, all brands of polymer clay will work well for this technique. I'm using Fimo Soft for today, but as I say, use whatever you have to hand. And this is a great one for using up leftover bits of clay. Now, to do our forward facing mountains, I'm just using very small amounts, this is about pea-sized, of clay, and I've got a selection here of 8 colours. These 6 colours are all the colours that remind me of Scottish mountains, sort of heather clad, the purples, the greens, the deep reds, and then I've also got a very light colour, so I've gone for an acidic yellowy green, and then a dark colour that's not actually black, it's this colour, so it's just a darker colour. And I have those in just to add a little bit of lightness and a little bit of dark in what we're going to do with the mountain nearest to the front of the scene. For the mountain furthest back, further away the mountains are, the bluer and lighter the colour will be, so I've gone for a soft sort of lilac-y colour, and we're going to do a blend, so I've got an equal amount of off-white to do that. Now I've gone for no absolutes in this, there's no actual white, there's no actual black, so I've gone for an off-white and just a dark colour. The next mountain in will be a slightly colour, so sort of like I've got a smoky grey sort of colour here, but you're going to see very definitely the difference between that one and that one. And again, got the same amount of white to do a skinner blend. Then the third mountain in, we've gone for something slightly greener, but again you can see quite a difference between those two. And in actual fact, this is a light version of this, and this is a lighter version of this with some white mixed in, and this is sort of a mix between those two colours. So that's how I've gone for those. For the sky, I've just gone for quite a neutral sort of blue, and again we're going to do a skinner blend, so we've gone for some white. Then it's nice to have a slightly darker colour to do the bottom of the hills, and then when we come to the rocks you're going to need a little bit of extra dark and a little bit of extra white just to highlight those as we go. And these sheets, I've put them all through on quite a thin setting of my pasta machine, so setting number 4 on my machine, where 0 is thick and 9 is thin. We'll start with these set of clays, where we're going to make our hills in the near distant. And before we do that, I will show you how I've set it all out on my measuring sheet to make life easy as we go. So here's the design I'm working from today. I know a lot of you don't sort of like drawing and stuff, so for anyone who doesn't, I have got this exact thing on my website, and I will put the link to that so you can download it and print it out for yourself, and obviously print it to whatever size you want. I've gone quite large here today because it's easier to do slightly larger when you're doing it as a demo, and this will end up as a brooch. Now I've just printed it out onto a piece of paper, and I've taped it to my measuring sheet, but I've taped it so that this line of the horizon is dead straight along one of the main right lines. And that's very important to do for when we're doing the rocks, because all of the bottoms of these rocks, where they do the reflections, are also going to be straight lines, and it's much easier to do it on a measured grid to give you a nice eye line when you put them on. And all I'm then going to do is going to flip a piece of wax paper over the top, tracing paper, wax paper, anything you can see, greaseproof paper, anything that you can see through easily but that you can work on, and also if you want to, that can be baked in the oven, will be great for this. And we're just going to put our pieces straight onto this. The next thing I've done is I've just taken a piece of, this is actually greaseproof paper, could have been the wax paper again, could have been tracing paper, and I have just given myself an outline of what our design is, and this is the piece we're going to use when we cut out our pieces to fit into our design. So let's get started, and we're going to start with these mountains in the front here. Now normally when you're working painting or doing anything else, you start from the background and work forwards. However, these mountains are going to be the most complicated ones, and I've found out from experience it's easier to do these first. So we'll do those, then work our way all the way through back here, finishing with the sky, and once we've done all that, then we'll come back and put the rocks on. You'll also notice as well on this design you've got little dotted lines here. The only reason I've done that is to show you when we're building up the mountains how to cut out your pieces on this side the same as on this side, and then just show where they go through the rocks. So let's get started. So here we are, we're going to start with our 8 colours, and what we're going to do, we're going to make effectively a Natasha bead, and because we've got just plain colours here, we are going to smash them into bits. Once you've got them nice and finely chopped, smush them all together into a lump. Try to make sure there's no air trapped inside. Roll it into a ball. Twist in one direction only. Flatten down the bottom. Then take your picture and make sure that this is as wide as your mountains are going to be. Chop down as neatly in the middle as you can. And see what patterns you've got. Now what you're looking for, you're not looking for anything particularly bright. In fact, the smaller amounts of colour you've got, the better and more sort of mountain-like it's going to look. And particularly I'm looking for any lines that go down that way or go down that way. So we're not too bad at the moment. So I'm going to take my knitting needle and I'm just going to pull this across the back where it's just slightly uneven, because I want this to be as even as possible when it goes through the pasta machine. So you shouldn't have distorted the front by doing that, and I'm going to put it through the pasta machine. Let's just pull that side out slightly. I'm going to put it through the pasta machine that way through on setting number 4, which is the same setting I'm doing all of my pieces on. So what we should then have, as I say, is sort of nice stripes going down in one direction. So that'll do nicely. Actually, I'm going to turn that round to that way, because the main part of the mountain is going down that way. So you then get your sheet, look at where your middle line is, and put the tracing paper down on your middle line. If it's not easy to see where your middle line is, actually fold your piece of paper over and put that down against where your middle line is, because you can then open it up. And what you're then going to do is you're going to take a little cocktail stick and you're going to prick all along where the top of your mountain area is. And along the middle line as well. And then also do the reflection and go up through the rocks where they're showing that the reflection would be. And then don't forget to do around the outside. Having done one side, go over and do your other side. Because then, where those dots are, you should be able to see to cut out your piece of clay. And there you have your mountains. So at this point, I'm going to pick up and start working on a sheet of baking parchment. I'll start to work on that side first. Put that side there as well so I can see what I'm doing at the same time. And I've done that so I can work on one side and then turn up and work on the other side. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to smudge this clay, but we're going to smudge it in the direction that the mountains are going. So these mountains are going this way. These ones are going this way. And then obviously the reflection will go that way and that way. And when I say smudging it, literally with the end of your knitting needle, just pull the clay across the surface to blur it, top to bottom, bottom to top, in the direction that your mountains are going. You will get little bits collecting on the end of your needle. That's fine, just take them off as you go. And you will find that you've gone a little bit thin where the bottom bit is, so just with the blunt end of your blade, just push that back up. And when you're happy with how that one's looking, turn around and do the same to the other side. And hopefully you should find you get more or less a mirror image. It won't be exact because obviously we're manipulating the clay, but it should give you the main colours in the same positions. What we can now do is to transfer these onto our piece. Just the top pieces to start with. So don't worry that it doesn't fit exactly into where your piece was, but what we do want is a completely flat edge. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to take our not quite dark, but our nearly dark piece. And I'm just going to put it into the smallest piece like that, but fold it over so that when it goes through the pass machine, I'm going to get a piece that's longer than our piece there. Okay, so I now know that that's the same height, because it's gone through on the same setting for on my pass machine as that. And what I want to do is to take a really thin strip. So use your tissue blade, give yourself a straight edge, and then with your tissue blade, try and take as thin a piece as you can get. And when you chop down, chop, and if you can, flick. And what hopefully you'll find is that the piece sticks to the edge of your blade. So you should then be able to literally put it up to your clay, because you want that to stick right along the bottom edge. Sometimes it comes straight off, sometimes you have to persuade it, just using a little craft knife there, persuade it to stick to the edge. And that just gives a little bit of an edging to the bottom of your hills. And now we leave that piece in place, but now we want a little light area where the light hits the water at the bottom. So exactly the same. I'm going to take off a piece of the not quite white, roll it up, put it through that way in the pass machine to give myself a similar piece like this. Same thing again. Cut the edge to give yourself a completely straight piece, and cut as thin a piece as you can, again flicking it so that it hopefully comes off on the edge of your blade. You should then just be able to transfer it over as before. If it doesn't quite go, just use your little craft knife to persuade it. And we want this to sit as straight as it possibly can. So if, like me, you notice you've got an area where it's not quite straight, press the clay down, because this is the sort of thing that we'll notice in your finished piece. You want that to be as straight as you can get it. So now we've done that, we need a reflection. So we don't need any more of the white, but we do need another one of the little brown to reflect what's above it. We want to make sure it doesn't in any way obscure the white. And now we can get our reflection pieces and fit them on underneath so we get our reflected mountains. And that's the first stage of our mountain scene complete. So having done our main pieces, we now want to put in the mountain that's just behind them, which is going to be this one. So this is going to be a skinner blend of these two colours. So as with all skinner blends, just chop through diagonally. If you're unsure how to do a skinner blend, I do have a video showing you tips and techniques on how to do one, and I'll put the links in the video details below. I'm going to put it that way up because we want to keep ourselves, we actually want the blend to only be about that wide when we're finished. So I'm going to start off by folding it in half like this. Now I've got 2 or 4 layers of clay here at the moment. So my first time I put it through, I'll put it up onto a thicker setting, so setting number 3 on my pasta machine, and then put it straight back down through to setting number 4, so that I am working always on setting number 4. So there it is, having gone through on setting number 4. So I'm going to constantly fold bottom to top, but each time I put it in the pasta machine, I'm going to push this end right up hard against the side of the pasta machine so that this doesn't spread too wide. So here we are, here's the skinner blend. However, it's a lot wider from light bit to dark bit than I want, because I want the light bit down here and the dark bit up here. So that's only about that much width. So I need to make this a lot smaller. So the way to do that, fold it in half as you would normally do if you're about to put it through the pasta machine, and then with your fingers, effectively concertina it. Just a little bit, don't try to do it all in one pass through the pasta machine. So concertina it a bit to start with. I'm going to put it through a butted hard against the pasta machine, but holding onto this side so it doesn't spread out. So that's got us a much thinner piece. Fold again, repeat again. And again, put through the pasta machine hard against the side. So now we have a piece that probably isn't far off what I need. So I'm going to go back to your picture. Find where the piece is. Put it down in such a way so it's going to be light down towards the bottom and darker. Go down a little bit more to make it even lighter at the bottom, because that gives you a little impression of being misty. And then exactly the same as before, find the cocktail stick. And you should find that this piece is pretty similar to that piece. So what I tend to do is, if that piece was like that, I will flip over so I get a nice reverse. on that side. And you should then be able to fit your pieces in. And curve it round, top and bottom. Make any adjustments as needed. And then just along the line where they join, just press in or roll very, very slightly. Doesn't matter if it goes slightly jagged, because of course mountains' edges aren't particularly smooth, but you want to make sure those are the same heights. And we'll finesse it more in a little bit. So the next one we're going to do is this one. And this one's going to be a blend of these two, and I'm going to do exactly the same all the way through. Skin a blend, same way I did this, make it large to start with, then make it narrow so that it fits in here, and I'll bring you back when we get to the stage of cutting out this piece. So there's the next piece. And I'm going to lay him so he sort of goes with a little bit of the lighter bit towards either side. And then put this one down here. And this one's slightly longer because it goes further on this side. And now the last little piece is this one here, which we're going to do this blend for. So the last little bit doesn't take much at all. And those are our mountains finished. So now we need the sky, top and bottom, and exactly the same as with the mountains, we're going to do a skin a blend of these two, and then we're going to make sure that it's no wider than about that wide, and then we're going to do the top and the bottom. Exactly the same as before. Find a nice place, go over for the sky. You'll often find by this stage that the shape of your mountains has moved on slightly, so just wiggle the sky a little bit, make it fit in. So don't worry too much about the shapes of things, because the tops of the mountains can move slightly. It's a great thing about polymer clay, you can move mountains. Do the same top and bottom. And now we've got all our mountains and our hills and both our sky and our reflection in. We're going to just smooth it all off. So get yourself another piece of wax, greaseproof or tracing paper, and we're going to put a piece that's big enough to fit over the top. Now I'm going to use the wax paper simply because it's the clearest one, so it's easiest to see what you're doing. And to start with, I'm just going to use the tip of my finger just to feel where there's little lumps and gaps. So you can manipulate the clay just slightly with your finger, sort of pulling it down, smoothing it over. Always paying attention to that middle bit. Now I don't want to lose that white line, but we can always dig it out slightly, or even add some more in if it goes completely. And when you've got it relatively smooth, then you can move on to something like a smoothing or some form of smoothing tool. If you've got one, stainless steel soap is brilliant. If you haven't, then you can just use the edge of your roller, and I'll be coming on to use the roller in a minute or two anyway. But what I'm looking to do is make sure I've got all of these little dots, which I use as my guidelines. So I'm just going over, making sure it's all nice and as smooth as I can get it. And when you've got it already nice and smooth, then you can always just give it a slight roll just to make sure it's all the same height. Okay, so that's our main part of the landscape done. So now we want to create some nice rocks in the foreground. Although of course, if you're happy with it like that, just literally cut out your shape as it is and you can leave it like that. You don't have to add any rocks. But for those of you who want to, I will show you how to do that. So we are going to take the leftover bits of our mounting colours, the leftover grungy bits from our Natasha bead, a little bit of that darker colour, and also a little bit, not too much, just of the sky colour as well, because I like to reflect all the colours we've got, and I'm going to sort of put them in order of their darkness. So we'll start with that lightest piece there. Now I need to roll these to make sure I've got no trapped air, but effectively we're then going to do a skinner blend of all those colours. So I'll give it a roll to start with. And because we've got quite a lot of clay here, I will put this up to a thicker setting on the pasta machine. So something like setting number 2, and then just keep doing a skinner blend across that until we see what we've got. So when you've got quite a nice blend, I'm just going to fold it in half. I'm going to put it back through the pasta machine on the same setting, so setting number 2 that I'm using at the moment. And then push it straight down to my thinnest usable setting, which is setting number 9 on my machine. So here we have our nice long piece, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to concertina this backwards and forwards to create a log of clay with one colour on one end and one on the other. And I'm going probably about 1 centimetre in width, probably just about not quite a ½ inch in width. Okay, so I'm just going to neaten that out slightly by making it more of a square shape, and then what I actually want is a round shape. So I'm just going to pull those round, and I want it roundish, so that it's dark on one side and light on the other. And once we've got it to almost that stage, we're going to make that even more dark on one and light on the other by taking a little piece of the darkest clay we had, and I'm going to put it through on the thinnest setting of my pasta machine. I'm going to take a piece, same length and also same width as my round, and that's going to go on the bit where the dark clay is. And then I'm going to do exactly the same with a piece of the lightest clay, again on the thinnest setting of the pasta machine, and exactly the same length, same width. So that is now going to be the basis of our rocks. Some pieces we're going to need to leave quite big, but some pieces are going to be quite small, and we're also going to need a couple of pieces which are very small. So have a look back at your piece. So we've got certainly one rock that's quite big. So I'm going to take off a small section. So you can see this cross section through there. Don't worry that it doesn't look particularly rock-like at the moment. We have a plan for that. So that's going to go the big one. And then I've certainly got a few sort of medium-sized. So I'm actually pushing this. I'm not worried about too much about the shape that I'm doing here. But we'll take off about that much. And reshape that as we go. And then I'm going to take off a little bit right at the very end. And I'm going to make this really, really small, but round. I'm making it so small. Just take off one small bit, because we do need some small rocks in areas. And then I'm going to actually just roll this really quite small, because this is going to be all the extra insert bits that we make our rocks with. So you want a piece that's still got light at one side and dark at the other, but can really be quite small. So I will start with this rock, because this rock has a reflection. I will show you how to do both the rock and the reflection, and then I will speed up to do all the rest, because once you know how to do one, it's exactly the same process, and you just make your different sizes for how your rocks are. Also, don't forget that at this stage, you have your piece. You don't have any sign now where the rocks are, so you really can put these wherever you want. So if there's a particular piece of your design that you don't like, put a rock where it is, and that will take away from any bits you don't like. So let's start with this one. So this one's probably not too far off this size, but I'm going to change the shape of it slightly. So what I'm looking at when I'm doing the shaping of this, I want the light bit to be at the top and the dark bit to be at the bottom. And if you notice, most of the rocks have fairly flat bottoms, and this goes back to what I was saying about it's all in line with this main horizon line, so the bottoms, flat bottoms, should also be like that. So I'm going to say you can make it whatever size you like, but that's about, let's do him about like that to start with. It's handy to have a look at one of your pieces that you've put through on setting number 4 on the pasta machine, because that will show you the thickness of your piece that you really need to cut if possible, because you want these rocks to be the same height as your background piece. Now, if you don't want to do that, if you want to make your rocks much more textural, don't put any reflections in. Just make your rocks in the foreground, and then you can have them really big and textural. You don't have to worry about doing repetition for the reflection. But for me, the whole point of this piece is having the reflections in, so that's what I'm teaching you how to do. But as per normal, do not feel you have to copy me. Just do whatever you want to do. And then you don't need to worry about what size you cut it. But because I want my pieces to be able to fit in, I want to cut them about that size. So I'm going to cut 2 of these that thickness. So there are my 2 pieces, and I am immediately going to put them on the piece of baking parchment that I'm going to work on, reflecting each other. So what we're going to do now, we are going to take, remember the tiny little piece we rolled out? I'm going to roll that even smaller. And I'm going to take off some really, really tiny slices of this one. So nice and thin, as thin as you can get. And I'm going to take off 4 slices. I'm then going to point them, so this is my piece that's pointing uppermost. I'm going to put them so that the white is to the main source of the light. Now for me, the main source of the light will always be this point where the light's coming through and hitting the water. So any light points on this one will be facing this way. Any light points on these rocks will be facing this side. When you put one piece on, you need to do the reverse on the other side, on the other piece. Same again, let's put one over here, down towards the bottom more. So then we're going to reverse and do the same there. And what we're then going to do is we're going to do similarly to how we did with the foreground mountains, we're going to smudge this. But this time we're going to smudge it by poking it in. So poking in and swirling, or whatever you do to the top, you need to do to the bottom. Where we've got the light on the edge of the rocks, it's nice to bring it in. You see, I'm using sort of rounding movements. Bring the dark up And then remember, whatever you do to the bottom, to the top, you need to then do to the bottom. They won't be exact, they will never be exact. Again, don't worry too much about that, but as long as you've got roughly the same sort of lights and darks in the same places, the eye will see them as reflection. Once we've got that, and this is what I was saying about the textured bit, if you want to leave your rock textured, then just put them on textured. For me, because these are going to be reflections, I need these to be flat and I need them to be the same sort of thickness as the clay I'm setting them into. So I am, with my finger, just going to make them more flat. Now I want to change the shape slightly, because in my rock, this one is quite broad here and it goes down slightly, so I'm just going to press in and change the shape, and having done the shape on that one, I'm going to press in and change the shape on that one. And I notice I've got quite a large bit of black here, so let's see if we can repeat that. Quite a large bit here, so let's see if we can repeat that. When I'm roughly happy, final thing I'm going to do is going to flatten off the bottoms, and then we can take our piece, and I'm not going to slavishly follow where he is in this one, but he was somewhere around here, because this piece, when he was reflected, went off the bottom of the piece. So you can see that I've sat them there, but they're not quite touching. And if you were just doing your rock on the surface and textured, you could actually leave it like that. But because I want them to be the same level as the piece on the background, obviously I then need to inset them. So all I'm going to do, actually one thing I should have done first, get yourself an extra sheet of your greaseproof or tracing paper and place it on the top half of your piece, because then any mess you make isn't going to go onto your nice pristine piece underneath. And then just with your craft knife cut out the shape where this rock will sit. And I will generally do one half at a time. Pick out the bit where he was sat, then drop him in. And hopefully should be able to just press him in. And now I'm going to go back and put the other piece sitting just under him. He's going just off the page. And what I can then do, you see there's a tiny little blue line between the two, and I want to re-emphasise that because I'm going to put a little bit of white in there. So I'm just going to create myself a groove, and I'm thinking about it in line with these lines. Then with a little piece of your off-white, roll yourself as thin a piece as you can possibly get. And then just pop him in between the rocks. And that gives you a nice impression of the rock sitting on the water. If you want to make that line slightly thinner, just roll your darker clay up. And that's our first reflected rock. So if you want to follow the designs I'm doing, we would then do this one, then this one, then do the two in front of him, and then I would finish off with these tiny ones. Because start with these first, because this gives you the idea of doing the slightly smaller ones, and always start from the one furthest away and work your way forward. So I'm going to do these ones, and I'll speed up the process a little bit but show you what I'm doing as I'm doing it, so you can follow and do your own as well. So now we're going to come to the bigger rocks, and these of course don't need reflections, so those two will go in next. For the little rocks, I'm just going to cut small slithers and not do an awful lot of, I won't add any extra bits in, just a little bit of manipulation just to make it look less pristine on the skinner blend that we did, and then just cut those in, and that's all we've got left to do really. Well, I've just looked up and noticed that the camera stopped, which is just so annoying and so typical. It stopped, I believe, just when I was about to start doing these small rocks, but you can see I've put them in exactly the same way as I did the larger ones. I haven't stuck exactly the same to my design, and these are actually slightly larger than I did in my design, but that just goes to show you, you don't have to stick to what you originally planned. So once you're happy, I'm going to take that piece off, and with a new piece of pristine paper, I'm just going to do exactly the same as we did at the top here, starting with my fingers, just pressing it down, getting rid of any lumps or bumps or bits you can see where the lines don't quite join up. And then when I've done it with my fingers and I'm happy, I will move on to the stainless steel soap. Right, so once you are completely happy with it, you have two choices. You could, depending on your thickness of your piece, actually bake it on this sheet of wax, greaseproof, or whatever paper you've used. However, I like to put it on a slightly thicker sheet because some of the bits are quite thin here. If you were going to cook it on this, then obviously you'd cut out your shape at this point. But I'm going to use some backing clay. So I'm just going to gather together all of my scraps, all the little leftover bits and pieces, plus some dark clay, and then put it all through on the pasta machine to give myself a sheet of scrap clay to use as backing. And I'm going to put it through on a slightly thinner setting than before, because we don't need an awful lot of extra thickness, just enough to give us some stability in the oven. So I will put this through on setting number 6. The clay was already well conditioned, so I don't need to do anything more than that. And now it's a case of hopefully peeling off. Now, you could obviously use your knife to take it off, but if you have used wax or greaseproof paper, it should, in theory, peel off relatively easily. And we then need to put it down, but we need to make sure we've got no air bubbles. So with that same piece of paper, as we go, I'm just going to press it down to make sure there's no trapped air underneath our piece between the patterned layer and the scrap layer we are putting it on. Okay, so if you wanted to, you could at this stage put your pattern back on and prick round to give yourself the shape or size you want. However, I'm just going to do it by eye. I'm just going to use the curve of the blade. So let's start with this side first. And once you're happy, transfer that to your tile. Cover the whole thing, tent the tile in foil and bake as per the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And once that's baked, we'll come back and I'll show you how to put the brooch backing on. So here's our piece, baked and out of the oven. And I've got a piece of the background clay that I'm going to use to put it on, which is wide enough that it'll fit all over the back and give me a bit of excess around the outside as well. So what I'm going to do to start with is I'm going to lay that on a piece of baking parchment, so I can move that around, just take the bits off so it's not going to stick. And then with a cocktail stick, I'm just going to mark the outline of where the brooch is going to sit. But I'm not going deep because we're going to be folding this clay up and around the outsides of our piece. But the other thing I'm going to do is, whilst it's on here, I'm going to mark the line, the direction in which that horizon line is. Because now, when I take this off, I can see from those lines where the horizon line goes, and I know that I can put the brooch in so that it's parallel and find a place to sit it in. So it wants to sit towards the top of where the brooch is going to go. Just check you've got it the right way around. And once your finding is in place, just cut out the area where the brooch pin sits in. And now we can put some liquid clay on the back of this to sit it on there, and then pull that clay up and around the sides. The other thing I will do at this stage, now we've got the gap in, is I'm just going to take off some of the excess clay, so we don't need too much when we pull it up and round. just a border will do. And of course, if you don't want to do a brooch, you could just leave this exactly as it is, like that. Put some form of bail on the back, have it a pendant, or just sit it and have it as a little picture, whatever you want to do. But to make it into a brooch, we're now going to add a little bit of the liquid clay onto the back. If you don't have liquid clay, then as I mentioned earlier, PVA glue would work, and just smear some of that on the back. So I'm going to put it all over the back, not a lot. I want enough to make it tacky rather than slippy. And once I've done all the way around the back, I am also going to do all the way around the sides, so that when we attach the clay up around the sides, it's got a little bit of the tacky liquid clay or glue to stick onto. Once I've got it, I'm going to put it back where my mark was. And now I can peel it off the sheet, put it on the back. I'm going to go work from the middle outwards to make sure there's no trapped air inside. And then I'm going to put the brooch back in at this stage. So I'm going to open it up, fit that in, pull this ever so slightly longer, because that'll make it slightly thinner as well. Chop off either end, and that should then fit in there. And we can take our knitting needle and just roll so that this clay joins up. You can actually push it back slightly if you need to. And we're looking to get it so it's nicely combined, so you've got no gaps and you can't see the brooch back at all. Remember to move the finding mechanism up and around so it's not trapped inside the clay. Get all the little bits sorted and filled. Now we are going to texture this afterwards, so don't worry too much. Certainly don't worry about things like fingerprints. And the other thing I do at this stage is I will just press that down to create that little groove in there so that it doesn't put as much pressure on this once your piece is baked. So now it's all nicely fitting to the underside, very carefully, making sure my thumbs are nice and clean so I'm not going to get any clay on the outside. I'm going to gently pull this up around the outside. Now, this is a technique, I know lots of people have seen it done, lots of people have used it. The first time I ever saw it done was by the wonderful Donna Cato. I don't know whether it was her particular technique, but I always consider this to be Donna Cato's technique. So that's who I always think of whenever I'm doing this. But as I say, I know it's been used loads of times in loads of videos. And all we're doing, we're just gradually bringing this up and over so it sits nice and tightly all the way around and creates a nice border to our piece. Once it's all up, you simply take your clay blade and then we're going to start going in, find the area, and because our brooch is nice and flat, we're just going to take off the edge with our clay blade. Once you've been around it once, make sure it's all pressed nicely on, and then you can go back and take off any excess. With a wet wipe you can make sure you've got no excess bits, and then very gently turn it over in your hand. Then with your texture sheet, just go over the whole piece on the back to create a texture and to remove sight of any little indents you've got in the back. One last check on the front to make sure that everything's fine, and then I will bake that face down on the tile so that there's no pressure put on this brooch fastening, and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And we'll come back when that's finished baking. there we are, there's our piece finished and out of the oven and cooled and baked. And just to show you, this was the one I showed you right at the start. So this was using exactly the same colours with the one change. This one had a slightly more reddy background hill and I changed it to be slightly more grey, which I think works more effectively in the 3 different colours. But I just like the way that these colours in the Natasha bead just came out. And the rocks were slightly more sort of pinky in that one than they were in this one. And this one, slightly less rocks and further back. This one, more rocks and further to the front. So it just goes to show how you can just change it slightly depending on what you want to do. You can, of course, also do a portrait format. So that's one done in that way. And again, the mountains, less mountains in here. And it was all done with greens. And then the rocks, obviously, were then more green as well. So that's the tutorial finished. I hope you enjoyed that one. I think you can have great fun with this, creating reflections and just mirroring whatever you've got by way of landscapes. I'm obviously drawn to Scottish Highland Lochs because I've spent a lot of wonderful holidays in Scotland and it's the most beautiful place. But just have a look around you, see what's close to you, have a look online, see what other things you can see and just choose some inspiration from that. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. As always, thank you so much for watching and thank you particularly for those who subscribe. I really do appreciate it. And I hope to see you next time. I think that's it for now. Bye.